Stream is up.
Yep, you're good. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay, it is 7 o'clock. We do have 8 members present, so I hereby call to order this Board of Education meeting, regular meeting for Monday, August 9th. We can start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If everyone can take, we have 9 members all present tonight. Everyone can take themselves off mute and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the
flag
of
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one
one nation,
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and justice for all.
and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, well, we do have a full house tonight. Thank you all for coming in. This is not a meeting that we tend to have. This early August meeting is usually canceled, but with the safe return plan, we thought it best to get in front of safe return and discuss before school actually begins. Thank you all. Hope you all had a great summer and got some relaxation and refreshing in. Just a few items on the agenda tonight, primarily around safe return and the bell schedule at the high school. We shouldn't need to talk about masking because we did get the EO from Hartford and the DPH guidance that states that masks will be required in school buildings. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Dr. De Silva.
Hi, everyone. So I echo what Jonathan says. Thanks for spending an extra summer day with us. I intend on giving everyone an update on all the summer activities on August 23rd. As you can imagine, at this point in the summer, it's still pretty busy. We're still hiring a lot of faculty, a lot of facility projects underway. Joe has not rested and his team hasn't. Nor have my colleagues. There's just a lot going on, which is all good news. In prepping for the opening days, our leadership team begins back next week. So on the 17th and 18th, we'll have all of our school leaders back for our summer retreat, and our new teachers will be joining us shortly thereafter. So I look forward to sharing all the nitty-gritty details on the 23rd, but I won't keep you too late tonight.
Thank you. I guess we can move on to approval of minutes. Do I have a motion?
Good evening, everyone. I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the May 24th, 2021.
Do I have a second? Kathleen? Any comments or adjustments? There being none, we can go to a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes for May 24th, 2021, please raise your hands. Non-unanimous. Thank you. Next item up, approval of the 6/14 minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the June 14th, 2021 meeting.
Does anyone second? Ken seconds. Any adjustments, corrections? There being none, all in favor of approving the minutes, please raise your hands. We have 6 in favor. Do I have 3 abstentions? Yes. Okay, 6 in favor, 3 abstain. Motion carries. Thank you. Next up, the approval of the 6/15 minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the June 15th, 2021 special meeting.
Do I have a second? Tina, thank you. Any corrections or adjustments? There being none, we can move to vote. All in favor of approving the minutes for June 15th, please raise your hands. That's 7-4. Do I have 2 abstentions? Okay, 7-4, 2 abstain. Thank you. Motion passes. And lastly, the 6/28 minutes. Do I have a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the minutes of the June 28th, 2021 meeting.
Do I have a second? Can you second? Any corrections or adjustments to these minutes?
Yes,
Liz, I saw your hand first.
on page 4 of 4 on the notes, about third way up, Kiera Friedman's first name is spelled incorrectly. It's Kiera. So I just wanted to make sure we captured that correctly.
Kiera, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Rachel?
So I believe we also had 3 more public comments that evening. So I think we need to add Linda Kim, Liam Tully, and Gigi Christel. I also have another correction on part B. I had surgery, so I was unable to attend that meeting, but Margaret on my behalf reported the correspondence report. So as of that day, we had 19 emails. 1 email was opposed to the implementation of the open choice program in Richfield. 2 emails regarded curriculum. 1 email regarded how to ask a question during a Board of Ed meeting. 14 emails provided feedback on the safe return plan. 13 of those opposed mask policy and 1 was in support. And 1 email was in regard to public comment.
Thank you for that. Nora, you have another correction for this one?
Yeah, two quick ones. The first one is on page 3, under letter F. The last sentence that begins, "Over the summer, Mr. Street will reach out to current booster club representatives and other school districts with the intention," and I think there should be an "of."
Yep.
And then on the final page, page 4, in the 4th bullet, where it says, ask the administration to reconsider their position on mask wearing in the schools, that I think it should be it. That's it.
Okay. Any other corrections or adjustments to these minutes? Okay, all those in favor of approving these minutes as adjusted, please raise your hands. Great. 2 abstentions, I assume, me and Rachel? 7 for and 2 abstain.
I left early, so I can't vote on the whole thing. That's why.
Are you going to abstain from the, are you going to vote for or abstain?
44, so I don't know if I can vote.
Okay, we have you abstain. We have 6 for and 3 abstentions for this motion. Okay. Good. Okay, we can move right into the safe return plan at this point.
All right, so hello again, everyone. The last time we met, if you remember, we presented a draft safe return plan. You'll also remember that at that time, we created that plan that early, primarily because we had to report to the State Department of Ed along with our application for our ESSER 3 grant. Just as an aside, it actually hasn't been approved. While it's been submitted, we still wait to hear from the State Department of Ed. Since that time, we've made adjustments based on what guidance we've received. And so in a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hanaway that will provide the Board of Ed and the public with an update since the 28th. It's important to note that at this point, we still anticipate receiving further guidance from the State Department of Ed and the Department of Public Health before the start of the school year. When that will actually be or how things shift, I don't know for sure, but I don't think they're going to be significant outside of and the earlier conversation around mask wearing. And let me take back the word significant. I don't know that there's going to be significant shifts outside of the one area that we're still waiting guidance on, which is mask wearing. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Hanaway, and then I think we're all prepared from every one of our departments to answer any questions.
Great. Thanks, Susie. Okay, so good evening, everybody. We have a draft safe return plan for discussion tonight. I apologize in advance if this ends up being a little bit longer of a conversation. Our goal is really to ensure that the public and the board understand in detail what we've included thus far. The template is very different as it was last year. It's not a narrative base. It's very much to the point, boxes and bullets, that type of thing. So we can jump right in. Okay, so as Susie said, since we last met, our leadership team has met many times to further develop our safe return plan. We've continued to receive feedback from families since the end of June regarding our planning for the coming year across multiple domains. This plan has a very different design, namely because we weren't required to follow a template as we were given last school year. So last year we were required by the State Department of Education to follow a template that included certain components, which led to the design of a really long document. We weren't required to do that. This plan will be merged with our ESSER grant application, as Susie had mentioned. So what we took what we designed on the 28th and merged it with what new information we have today. Okay, so for sense of context, we are no longer, that's a question we get. When did we stop doing? When did we no longer continue doing? And so we're no longer utilizing levels of risk to define how we're approaching planning for this coming school year, which was a defining component of our planning last school year. The State Department of Ed is no longer defining low, moderate, high risk in the same way that they were. So we're not creating plans that are based on each one of those as we had. While we continue to watch the COVID-19 rates locally, they're not asking us to create plans depending on level of risk, but we will be making decisions around our mitigation strategies dependent on the level of risk locally. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more later. The main focus and guidance from the State Department of Ed around schools being open and safe that we've received this summer is about being open, being safe, but providing in-person instruction, most importantly. And the consistent message from the State Department of Ed and the Department of Health has been that the #1 mitigation strategy for the pandemic right now is vaccinations. So in our plan, it's broken into 2 main sections, health and safety and continuity of learning. Within each section, you'll note that there are strategies that are italicized. Those italics indicate strategies that would likely be the first ones we would roll back. As of right now, this is what our thinking is, not our promise. But what our thinking is that these would be the ones we would roll back should the numbers change and we have to engage in more conservative mitigation efforts. Where applicable, we delineated between pre-K 5, 6, 8, and 9, 12, applying a different approach among levels. And we're not going to hit every component of the plan this evening, but highlights and topics that require more significant attention. And then this plan also keeps at its focus accelerating learning for students after 18 months of instructional interruptions, as well as making sure that we're accounting for their social emotional well-being and that of the staff members as well. All right, so I'm going to jump right into health and safety. This is far longer, namely because we have had many years of good practice around instruction. So there is a lot less planning to do around the instructional side as compared with the health and safety. So I'm going to move through these first few pretty quickly because they're things we already know. We're no longer mandating that classrooms push to 3 to 6 feet. We're aiming for 3 to 6 feet between students as much as we can. 3 feet distance may not be feasible in all settings. We've discussed this before. So the notion of social distancing and physical distancing will be to the best extent that we can. And Susie touched on the executive order from Governor Lamont, which is what's in place right now, requiring masks to be worn inside schools by students and staff, regardless of vaccination status, and that we will wait to hear more from the State Department of Ed on this. We are continuing to follow our normal contact tracing, isolation, and quarantining rules as we did at the end of this past school year. So our contact tracing efforts, I think we honed as the year went on, and we're going to continue to use the data tracker that we did this past school year, or the eventual version of it that it came to be. We are still going to isolate anybody in the building who's showing signs of COVID. And those staff and students who are vaccinated and not displaying symptoms of COVID, even if they've been exposed to somebody, will not be required to quarantine. For those, until a vaccine is available under 12, or until we receive more specific guidance from the Department of Health or State Department of Education, we will still have to quarantine whole classes from the pre-K through 5 level, because our ability to define who is within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more at those grades is really difficult without sacrificing significant experience within the instructional domain. We're not going to be having elementary kids sit in the same seat all day long. They're going to be moving around. And so the notion of who is within 6 feet for 15 minutes to define who has to quarantine is going to be an extreme challenge. And so at this point right now, we're still going to have to quarantine whole classes if there's a positive case. Furnitures in classrooms, we really stripped our classrooms down last school year. We're not doing that this year. Classes are going to be designed for instructional purposes and for instructional purposes, whether that's where students sit, what kind of furniture we use, the storage furniture for books and things like that. It's going to be as it would be for teacher requests based on instruction. The cafeteria use, this is most relevant really for elementary because they were eating in their classrooms. We're not going to have that this coming school year. At the elementary level, we're going to have one grade level at a time within the cafeteria, spaced out. And to the extent that we can, outdoor eating as much as is feasible. And then at the middle and high school, they're going to have multiple waves and they're going to have typical use of their cafeterias. Aiming for as much space as much as is possible. And depending on the cafeteria, that might be more feasible. East Ridge has a larger cafeteria, allowing for more spacing, whereas Scotts Ridge is smaller. Okay, so moving into our essentials. So this is our art, music, PE, library, media. They're no longer going to take place in the students' classrooms. They're going to take place in their typical instructional classrooms. So the art is going to be in the art room, music where they would provide instruction, library media within the library media center. So they're no longer going to be in the classroom. Those teachers will not be traveling room to room to room. With regards to ventilation protocols, we're going to continue having our windows open as much as weather permits. And our exhaust ventilation, also known as purging, will continue to run 24/7. Joe Moritz, do you mind just quickly, because you will do it better than I will, explaining what that purging means?
Sure. So basically we have two methods of purging. Our elementary schools, the older elementary schools, we don't have the luxury of the air handlers and the computerized systems. So those schools, basically what we do with the windows open, we run every single building and classroom exhaust system 24/7. And what that gives us is a constant changeover of air. So we're constantly pulling in fresh air and exhausting it through the building, through the roof, and then over the entrance ways where we have exhaust fans. Our schools with the air handlers and the more sophisticated automated systems, we have computer programs designed. In addition to running those building exhausts, we do run those, the economizers on the air handlers, which open up and pull in the fresh air. And we have specific programs that we run for the middle schools and the high school.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, John, next. I apologize that the two middle rows are the same thing twice, so we'll just ignore one of them. So this whole slide is about the use of plexiglass. We're no longer going to be having plexiglass, universal plexiglass on individual student desks. We actually didn't have them on every single desk last year because we had sporadic classrooms throughout the district at the elementary level that were able to space out at 6 feet. So they didn't have to have plexiglass, but it was not common. But because we are not following the same physical and social distancing guidelines as we did last year, we're not going to have the plexiglass on every single student desk. We are going to have plexiglass available at the teacher discretion for small group instruction. And this is when masks are not worn for instructional purposes, or if a student is unable to be masked due to the nature of a disability or the presence of a medical condition. So we provided to them to the teachers plexiglass for small group instruction. We're not going to be taking that away, But it's not going to be necessary if students and adults remain with their masks on. But if masks have to come off at that kind of proximity for small group instruction, then they have the option of using that. And again, same with face shields. We will have them available by teacher or student when necessary for instructional purposes or when within close proximity with a mask. Last year, we included in our plan for every elementary school a health office para. We didn't have them we already had a health office para at the middle schools, and we don't have one at the high school because there are multiple nurses in the health office. But for the elementary level, we did include health office paras, which we are no longer going to be including for this coming school year. Third-party use of our indoor facilities, we are going to permit outside of school hours only, which would typically be the case outside of COVID, that they can only typically use our space when we're not there. And then they have to follow their own rules, whatever rules that organization individually sets forth, unless there's something very specific and unique, which oftentimes they'll speak with building administration or Joe about. Transportation, so seating on buses, windows, and distance from the driver. So we're going to continue to have windows open. That's clear from the Department of Health that we should aim to have windows open as much as possible on the bus. We're going to leave the first row behind the bus driver empty, so long as seating capacity permits, so that we can reduce the need for those folks to have to quarantine or to be unnecessarily exposed. And if we can, we're going to prefer to have one student per seat if the capacity permits, but we're not going to be planning for reduced ridership. We're planning for full ridership. Okay, so you notice here this slide is full on the left-hand column of italicized topics. So as I mentioned towards the beginning, these would be the topics that we would, or these would be the strategies that we may consider pulling back first on, should the nature of the local rates require us to be more conservative. And that would be directly within conversation with our district medical advisor and with the Department of Health. So the first being visitors. We are allowing visitors in the building to start this school year as of right now. They would be required to follow all the same masking protocols indoors as our staff members would, and they will have to do a COVID self-screener as we had everybody do, including staff last school year. Class events, parties, concerts, and theater performances. We are going to go forward with these. At the elementary level, we are going to be limited these to each class inside, again, trying not to unnecessarily quarantine whole classes because of the challenges at elementary, but groups of class would be permitted for performance outside. Theater and music performances will be permitted inside, although we may have a capacity limit for audience members. We will be moving forward with offering parents the option of holding planning and placement team meetings or PPT meetings or any parent meetings in person or virtually. That will be at the parents' choice. And then with regards to in-building staff meetings, team meetings, faculty meetings, department or grade level wide meetings. So these are going to be a combination of in-person and virtual dependent on the purpose and efficiency. So an example of, a grade level team maybe getting together in person to analyze copies of student work for common grading purposes, whereas we may be having multiple team members across schools meeting, and we may decide to do that virtually just to save time. So it really depends on the purpose and the efficiency need for the meeting. We are right now planning on holding faculty meetings in our largest space available in person. And again, I mentioned before, PPT meetings will be at the parent choice. If the parent attends in person, then staff members will be present in person. All right, so that's health and safety. Continuity of learning is not nearly as long, so it might make sense for me just to get through the rest of it and then take questions at the end. So we reviewed this when we met on June 28th, these three topics here. School day hours, we are returning to a full school day, adding back in the 40 minutes of time reduced during the 20 to 21 school year. And as a reminder, we took 20 minutes off the front end and the back end of the day so that we could stretch out arrival and dismissal to keep kids from congregating in certain places. We are not planning on a hybrid model for the 21-22 school year. So that was our cohort A and cohort B to reduce density within the building. And that's because we're not having the same physical distancing requirements as we did at the time. And parents will not be afforded a remote learning option as last year. They could opt in or out depending on their preference. So we're not providing that as an option this coming school year. And that was communicated to us this past spring from the State Department of Ed that they would not be requiring districts to provide that option. And those students who have medical complications, whose doctors believe that they're physically unable or unsafe to attend school, they should have a conversation with the building administration and school nurse regarding learning program options. They may be eligible for homebound or partial homebound instruction. And that's a case-by-case basis, depending, which actually doesn't necessarily fall into this plan. That falls into the normal homebound and hospitalized instruction protocols. So with regards to educating quarantine students, so we're taking a different approach for elementary as we did secondary. I think we saw big differences last year in the performance and the instructional experience of students, whether they're in person, hybrid, or quarantining, able to attend full time. And so what we decided was at the elementary level, we're going to reserve 3 building subs across the district for this purpose. And we don't know yet how much they're going to be utilized or not. We really don't know. And we have met multiple times with the elementary principal group to think through the smartest way to organize this, not only from a logistics standpoint, but from a content delivery standpoint. But these 3 building subs across the district would provide a portion of each day with synchronous instruction, which may also include special education instruction or service hours. And then at the middle and high school level, we will be following our standard practice as we did pre-COVID of posting work and posting the lesson and work in the Google Classroom, regardless if the student is out sick or on a mandated quarantine. And so the reason for the big difference very much so is because of the vaccination availability and frankly, participation that we think exists for our middle and high school levels. So students who are vaccinated, who are not showing symptoms, will not have to quarantine. It will be students who are vaccinated and showing symptoms, but that means they're sick. And so we would treat that as we would pre-COVID, a sick student at the high school or middle school level. This is the approach that we would normally take. Or unfortunately, an unvaccinated student, sick or not sick, would still have to stay out on the quarantine. So really, we hope that the levels of quarantining will be far reduced because of the vaccination participation that we believe exists out there for middle and high school. We did include in all parents have to do that demographic update in PowerSchool at the end of this month before school starts, where you have to update your email address and make sure that all your information is correct. And then there's a whole slew of questions. We did include in that an optional, not required question for parents around whether or not their child is vaccinated. And the reason we did that is to not have kids spend any time out of school if they don't need to, and to have efficiency of information for our health offices as they're doing contact tracing and making phone calls. So again, it's not a required question, it's optional. And then building subs, we are going to maintain the same number of building subs, which for each elementary school was, Susie, 3?
It's 3.
3, right. And 5 for the high school and 4 for the middle schools, I believe.
Yeah, it was 3, 4, and 5.
3, 4, 5. Thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.
Field trips, we're almost done. We are permitting field trips. Again, this is italicized. This is one of the like visitors would be that we would pull back on if need be, if we had to execute a more conservative stance for students. But our students and staff would still have to follow the same protocols that Ridgefield Public Schools would require at that point, regardless of where they are in their field trip inside. And then with regards to recess, for the elementary and middle levels, whole grade level recess will be permitted outdoors. We're not going to be segregating classes at the elementary level for recess as we had this past school year. We're going to be following the same masking policy as we had. Students are permitted to be maskless while in activity outside. And then indoor recess will be per classroom following the same masking policy. But at the elementary level, oftentimes outside of COVID, indoor recess is within your class, within your classroom anyway, because of lack of availability of a common space large enough. Okay. So that was as efficient, I think, as we could get it. Again, there were a few components that we didn't highlight tonight that were a bit more self-explanatory, don't require as much discussion.
Thanks, Dr. Hanaway.
We'll have a lot of questions.
So if Jonathan, what might be easier is if whoever asks them, we could just decide who makes the most sense to answer it.
Sure. Okay, I see Tina's hand and then Kathleen at this point. First, Tina.
I'm sorry, a few weeks off, I forgot to unmute myself. First of all, thank you. Thank you for all your work. Before anything, sorry, I have a cough. I want to thank all the faculty, staff, everyone who's worked endlessly over summer. Thank you for the summer bridge. Thank you for the RPS buddies. Thank you for the extended school year. It's been thank you. You put our kids first. You worked endless hours. So truly, thank you. Everybody is deeply appreciated. So before anything, I want to thank you. Thank you for putting this together. It's been a long year. And so, the fact that you've come to work, you've done this for all of us, for all our kids. I just want to keep saying thank you. I mean, it's really appreciated. I'm sure I speak for all parents. So my big question, so thank you, Liz, for sharing this. I have two big questions and I'm going to let other people speak because I did write a huge list of questions, but I won't take all of them. My biggest one is because masks are so hot topic, and I'm just going to ask, are there any ramifications, if at all, if we as a district choose not to follow the executive order, whatever it's stated, or recommendations? Are there any?
So that's a good question, Tina. And while I cannot tell you for certain, we expect that council will be sending something out to school districts to give us a better understanding of what the implications would be. Right now, what we're hearing is that if we did not follow an executive order that was provided to us by the governor, that the superintendent personally and the Board of Education members personally would be liable, both criminally and legally. If it was instead of an executive order, let's just say that we heard from the State Department of Ed that it was a strong recommendation, what I'm hearing in that particular case is while we would not be criminally liable, we would both be personally, the superintendent and the Board of Education members individually. So do I know that for certain? Not yet, but that's what the superintendent group has been hearing that would likely come from council. So when I hear that or hear more about that, I'll certainly share it. That's all I can share at this point, but it's a good question.
Right.
And one that many school districts, by the way, are asking, and parents are asking,
Yes.
What are the ramifications if?
And, there are concerns. We've all got the emails. Parents are asking these questions. So I'm glad we're in front of it, and everybody's hearing can understand that is not a simple yes or no. There are other consequences for all of us as board members, as superintendents, as a district as such. So thank you for that.
The reality is that we know that many boards of education are grappling with the same kind of conversation. And so as a result, boards want to know what happens if, whichever the if goes, whichever direction it goes. And that's been what we're hearing so far. So as I hear more and anything that I do hear, I'll certainly communicate it out to the board.
Thank you. Another quick question. And I can ask this later too. There's another question I want to talk about high school and middle school kids when they're quarantined or not quarantined and, learning about them. But the other question is, as we go forward about vaccination status, I know Liz mentioned that when you update your demographics, you may so choose to share your child's vaccination status. But would this same apply to our visitors? And if, let's say there is a parent who chooses not to share a vaccination status, and let's say the child there's a call making for quarantine purposes, would that be accepted at that time?
So you asked a couple of different questions. It's absolutely optional if during the demographic phase of Power School, if parents want to elect to say, yes, my child's been vaccinated or no. At that point, we're not asking for a parent to provide the child's vaccination card. However, we would ask them to share that. And they have been, by the way, many parents have been sharing the vaccination cards with their school nurses. At the point where we were in the position to possibly vaccinate a child, if we did not have the child's, possibly quarantine a child, if we did not have the child's vaccination card, we would be in the position to have to quarantine that child. Whereas if we had their vaccination card and knew that they were vaccinated and they were not presenting symptoms, they would not have to quarantine. And what the State Department of Ed actually said to us, in particular with the high school where the majority of our children could possibly be vaccinated, is that those students, let's just say, that are involved in athletics, in particular in the fall, they would not have to quarantine if vaccinated, so long as they were symptom-free. So I think for many students, that will be a highlight of their athletic fall.
Thank you. I'll hold Jonathan. I have more questions, but I'll give everybody else a chance.
Sure, I think Kathleen was next.
Hi, first of all, some of my questions piggyback on what Tina had asked. And as I said, first of all, thank you. I mean, I don't have a child in the school, but these are unprecedented times. That's why I'm going to ask some unprecedented questions, because none of us have experienced them before. I'm just thinking, as we talk about asking for vaccinations, are COVID vaccinations considered like flu shots rather than a vaccination such as a polio shot or whatever? Why can't we ask for proof up front, not only for our faculty, for our children? And secondly, I'm going to add on this, is there any way, I mean, I'm just thinking as we go into school, it would just make it clearer. We have the info there. We don't have to keep searching. The second thing I'm looking at is, and there may be legal ramifications. Again, I don't know. Children 11 and under, is there any way to ask before they return to school to come with a proof of testing, recent testing within a week or two, just so that we can start with a blank slate and move forward? And I know these are tough questions, but I know there are things that are in people's minds.
So I'm going to hope to be able to make sure I caught them all. The first one, which is vaccination of staff, we have asked that our faculty that are vaccinated provide proof that they are vaccinated. So that one's that, yes. As for students and the requirements similar to other vaccinations like the polio, right now the COVID vaccination is not required. So as a result of that, we cannot require that they provide evidence. Again, it's helpful to us in the demographic phase because it'll save us a lot of time, in particular at the above 12 years old, to know who's been vaccinated so that we don't have to go through that long process. That said, we cannot require it. And in fact, the way in which Power School is set up, it's actually passive. So a parent can basically ignore that question if they choose to. They don't even have to select, no, I don't want to tell you. They can just ignore it. And what was your third question, Kathleen?
Thinking about 11 and under, is there any way,
Oh,
because I know other institutions have done it, they may
testing.
ask for a proof of
So that's something that we didn't share in the presentation tonight, but the State Department of Ed is partnering with outside facilities and outside organizations to partner with each school district with the elementary students, K6 actually, I believe, to provide optional screening for children. So at this point, it's still in the exploratory state phase. Aaron reached out to the State Department of Ed and said, yes, we'd like to explore this option for our district. It's at no cost to the district, absolutely no cost, or if it is, it's nominal. So at this point, we don't know more than we're going to have a partnership available to us. We have the opportunity to access that partnership. It would be absolutely optional for families. Families would not be required to have their child screened. The outside facility would be doing really all of the heavy lifting. We would just make our students available. It would be the easier of the two COVID swabs, not the one that tickles your brain, but the easier one, especially for our elementary children. But again, it's very exploratory at this phase, Kathleen. So we did communicate to the State Department of Ed and said, yes, tell us more. And so now we're waiting to hear back from them.
Thank you very much. And just personally, I'm so happy that we're going back with masks. With all the unknowns out there. So that's my personal opinion.
Thank you, Kathleen. Next hand I see is Rachel.
Okay, so in regard to the ventilation protocols, is there any service tests or needed maintenance on the systems that we see that we need, since we're using them nonstop, to make sure that they're working properly? That's my first question.
Joe?
Yeah, actually, when all this started and we started running these programs, we went through all the mechanicals. We upgraded the filters where we needed to upgrade them. So we've been keeping an eye on them. The service is due probably at the end of this. I think it's the end of August. We're due for the next service, and we'll treat it the same way that we did in the beginning. And it's just basically the belts and the filters, lubrication. We check the motors and all that. So we stepped up our normal PM work because we knew that the draw on these were going to be insane because they've never been run 24/7, and they've run very well this past year. So we should be in good shape, I hope.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
Yep.
And then my next question is in regard to educating the quarantine students. So just two parts. Will there be the 3, the 4, and the 5, the building subs? Will that be coming out of our operating budget for this year, or will we be adding them to a COVID-19 expenditure list and then hoping to cover them with grant money like we did last year and we had a running list?
Well, we probably will keep a running list for sure, just to know where our spending is, and likely we'll have to understand greater what that impact will be. But as of right now, the additional subs at each level are covered within our operating budget. So what happens typically, Rachel, is we did increase our subs from pre-COVID, but what typically happens is we use that amount of subs, we just access them day to day. And so rather than doing that, these will be permanent fixtures in our building, for lack of a better word. So they get to know our kids get to know them. If there's a longer period of time when a teacher needs to be out, this individual becomes the guest teacher. And so it's just a different type of culture than perhaps any one of us could become a daily sub and we're in and out and we don't get to know the children in the same way. But is this as a result of COVID that we increased? Yes, but at the same time, there's a little bit more complication to it in terms of just being able to provide a more consistent experience for our students. There is a difference though, and the one piece that's directly connected to COVID is that we're intending on using at the elementary level, there's 3 allocated per building, but of the 3 allocated per building, we're going to share 3 of the 6 schools to provide that asynchronous, synchronous experience for students during a quarantine. As Dr. Hanaway mentioned, we do anticipate that there will be less quarantining across the secondary level and more at the elementary level. But in addition to that, quite frankly, the elementary children just don't have the ability to be independent like our secondary kids, are more likely, not to suggest that they're always independent, but are more independent than the elementary kids. And so we definitely needed to think about what we were going to provide for the children that are more likely, A, to be quarantined, and B, to not have access in the same way in terms of, executive functioning and independence.
I could just add real quick, this is when most likely a student has been exposed outside of school. Because if they've been exposed at the elementary level at school, the higher likelihood is that their class will be quarantined and their teacher will be giving them some kind of instructional experience. So it's not, this is for these one-off situations. First, we have 4 kids across 2nd grade in our whole district type of situation, instead of when we have to quarantine an entire class.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And then I have a question in the plan on the academic needs. Where will fiscal impact be absorbed? So when reaching the needs of our students, our current operating budget, ESSER grants, or thinking forward to the next budget cycle. So I think there was a whole list of things. And I appreciate everything that the administration has done for our kids over the summer, the bridge program, MTSS, just amazing work. So there's I think there's 5 bullets on page, on towards the end of the packet.
Yep. So I'll speak to those, Rachel. You asked about where the costs would hit. A little bit of perhaps all 3, but certainly 1 and 2. So through the typical process we have in our schools, fortunate to Ridgefield, we have interventionists and we have coaches across our sites. Ms. Gillette spoke about the supports at the high school, I think one of our last board meetings. So we naturally have structures and systems in place to support children. In addition to that, you might remember when I presented the proposal for ARPA ESSER 3, part of that proposal was to support kids through an extended day opportunity. So rather than supplanting what children are already experiencing through the structures and systems that we have, it would be an extended opportunity. That could be physical or it could also be virtual, and also a Bridge 2 program. So we're finalizing our numbers now for Bridge 1. And so we should have a better understanding in the coming weeks what our final numbers there were so that we can plan for next summer. But in the meantime, should our grant be awarded, within that grant, we allowed for after the first universal screener in October, November, once we know where our students are academically, that we could provide them with an extended learning opportunity, or quite frankly, even on the social emotional side. If they needed additional support, whether that's one-on-one or in a group setting. And again, it could possibly be virtual if it's needed. For example, if transportation was a problem for a parent and the child needed to go home on the school bus, then the child could go home on the school bus and then they could access a certified educator once they got home. And so we really will plan for that, but we do want to provide kids an opportunity to come back, get back in their rhythm. Structure and routine and systems oftentimes do help children regain. So let's see where that lands us. Probably after that first universal screener, we'll have a better sense, and then we could create a program that meets students' needs.
Thank you so much.
And the third part, which was, would it hit the operating budget in the future? I don't know that. That's why I said 2 out of 3. Who knows? But at this point, we're planning for 1 and 2.
I can add to it, and we don't know more yet, but we were made aware last week that there's going to be another ESSER grant allocation specifically for students with disabilities, that there will be a new grant application for. We don't expect to see any of those monies until much later in the school year because they haven't even designed the grant application yet. And we don't have a sense of how much money to expect, but there will be some funds made available to districts specifically for populations of students with IEPs. And the expectation is to use that money to directly support COVID impacts.
Okay, thank you. I'd seen Sean's hand. I don't see him now. I see Margaret.
Jonathan, my camera's not feeling well, so I'm off camera, but I do have a couple of questions. Actually, it looks like you're letting me in on my laptop, so if that starts up, I will have a camera again. Let's do this. And we're back. Can you see me?
We saw you for a second and then you were gone.
There you are.
Oh, there you are.
All right. So I see we're tracking kids with vaccines. Question is, let me mute that one. Are we tracking kids with natural immunity? We have 120 million Americans right now that have contracted and recovered from COVID. And all science so far states that their immunity is at least as good as a vaccine, if not stronger. Are we tracking those at all?
Well, I'm definitely not tracking that, Sean, and I wish I had enough qualifications to say that I was, but certainly not. At this point, we're really tracking what the state has asked us to track with respect to quarantine. So we want to be sure that we keep our kids in, and the best way that we can do that based on what the State Department of Ed has told us so far is to know who's been vaccinated. Again, that's not something that would be publicized. That's directly with the nurse and the child's parent if they elect to tell us. And there could be a great possibility that we never have to ask that question to the vast majority of our students, and that's my hope. But if we do, and we have the potential to keep children in school, we'd like to be able to do that.
I get it, but we're ignoring, at least for the under 12 set, a lot of people that actually have immunity. And I think that's problematic and something we should look at.
Sean, I think that might be a question better suited to asking the State Department of Public Health than the.
It may be, but I think Dr. De Silva is our conduit to do that. I can't do that directly.
Sean, I'll be glad to bring that question up. One of the things that I didn't mention in my superintendent's report, but I did mention in my Friday communication, is we are meeting again as a team with Dr. Ahern and Ed Briggs and Aaron Crook. So I will certainly bring that up on Wednesday. And if it's not something that's addressed directly there, we could always bring it up with the Department of Public Health if that's a question that we want to ask. Which we have.
I think it's an important one myself. I'm glad we're not bending. Yeah, I'm glad we're not bending plexiglass anymore, Joe. I'm glad you grew a new skill set that might be useful in the open marketplace. Beyond subs and staff, is there any other costs that we should be looking to expect?
I think at this point, Sean, what's my greatest concern is relative to a conversation we're going to be having or at least an FYI that we'll be having a little bit later tonight. And that's relative to staffing and some of the changes that we're seeing with our staffing, not only with enrollment going up and down, which is a natural process, but also students with very specific needs. And so if there's anything that we'll be watchful of is what is the impact of perhaps the past year and a half and or students that are coming into the district and everything that comes with the ebb and flow of that process and how we're meeting their needs best. So I think the greatest impact will be staffing. At this point, I don't know that there'll be any changes with our ventilation system. I think we saw greater costs last year related to that. And so I think that's potentially still there this year. When you're running 24/7, you're going to see those costs. So I imagine that still will be a variable that we'll be discussing throughout the course of the year and what that impact would be. Outside of that, I think we're pretty well prepared with masks should we need them. But I think we certainly learned that most of our students, when they did come to school, wanted to bring their own swag with them. So they weren't really interested in ours. So I don't know that we'll need any additional PPE in that regard. So I think we're pretty well settled outside of what could be a real significant variable, which is staffing.
Thank you.
Okay, Margaret, you're next.
Hi, again, I just want to say thank you all for putting together the plan, and also thank you for all the hard work over the summer and, helping our students start to feel a little bit more sense of normalcy than they felt last year. I have 3 questions. One actually is about the plexiglass. So I just wondered if you could help me understand why we're not doing plexiglass in the elementary schools, especially if, we're not going to have the full 6 feet of distance between students. And then also we won't have the cohorting. So not so much is different in their classrooms from last year. So just wanted to understand why we might be doing away with that.
I saw Dr. Hanaway unmute, so it's all yours.
It's not that complicated unfortunately, or that sophisticated response outside of the Department of Public Health has guided us that it's not necessary. Students are masked right now based on the information they have about the vaccine and how it's spreading, or not the vaccine, I'm sorry, the virus and how it's spreading. Is that, they didn't think that it was a mitigation strategy that was necessary. And there is an experience to it that is not easy. These are not plexiglass. These are, tell me, Joe, polycarbonate. Okay. They're very, very loud. You walk by them and they tremble and they make a tremendous amount of sound in the elementary classroom. And so I do think that they did cause some disruption at times during the year. And so if we're not receiving guidance that they are, an important mitigation strategy right now, then we don't want to interrupt the elementary experience any more than it already was.
So seeing how that, it sounds like that thinking has evolved, and we know that there's been a lot of evolution in terms of finding out new information and stuff. I just wonder, is it something though that if it were to come back, let's say, that it does prove to be a mitigation strategy that does work. I'm thinking of, I don't want our students out of school, our elementary students, and I certainly for our parents don't want those kids on quarantine, right? We saw what happened with families last year. So if that's something that's an easy mitigation strategy to put back in place, is that something we'd be able to do? I mean, is the plexiglass sitting in a closet somewhere, or would that?
We don't have plexiglass sitting in a closet somewhere, but we did order some in polycarbonate in preparation for this year. So if we needed it, we could certainly pull out some. It wouldn't be enough to cover what we covered this past school year. That said, I think there are many different vendors that are well prepared to give school districts what they need, not necessarily what financially we're prepared for, but what we need. Would you agree, Joe?
Yes, and actually the manufacturer is in Bethel. And I've been in contact with them probably a couple months ago. And so they're still tooled up and they're anticipating, they're standing by for whatever we need.
Thank you.
And we still have from what we had from last year, correct?
And we still have a supply from last year.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
The second of my three questions is, and I hope I'm asking this question hoping that we never even have to think about the answer, but again, in the elementary schools, if there were to be an outbreak in one of the schools, what happens if it gets to a certain point? I mean, I think we even talked about this last year. Is there a threshold at which the school itself would be closed down? Is that kind of like that flu protocol that we've had in the past, or how does that get handled?
I think it would be similar to what we experienced this past year. Is we would collect the data, Margaret. We would consult with our local health director and our medical advisor. And then if we had to, like we did last year as well, we contacted the State Department of Ed and asked what their recommendations were in terms of closing down a particular school for a period of time. And we did have a threshold that we use in that same way. At this time, I would expect it would likely be the same, although it's hard to know for sure.
And then my last question is, it's actually about those 11-year-olds, right? The sixth graders. So they can't be vaccinated. And yet they're also not in the elementary schools where there are these building subs who are supposed to help them out with the learning. So can you help me understand what the plan is for that? I mean, is there a way to do something? Especially those sixth graders. I'm not sure the Google Classroom idea is the best from a learning standpoint, but you could speak to that better.
It's not. And if I'm being really honest, it's not for anyone. None of this is ideal, but what we did know for sure is that last year, depending upon the situation, one group of children was neglected in that hybrid. We did an amazing job. Our faculty was outstanding. Thanks to Wes, we had everything we needed. That said, no different than me being here and tending to the people behind me, it's just hard to do. Someone's going to get more attention than another group. And that was the same that happened last year. And so the goal would be to try to keep kids in school. And if they were out, we don't expect them to be out for a significant amount of time. And so hopefully it's a very acute period of time. But to try to navigate at the secondary level, the amount of content teachers we would need to have available to provide synchronous instruction, it would kill us on the budget side. And in terms of the experience for the child, I'm not sure the risk benefit there is there, Margaret. And even at the elementary level, it's an access point to independence, but it's really not ideal.
Next question, Nora.
I just had one kind of quick question, which is on the presentation, it didn't talk about the what happens when a teacher is quarantined, although it was discussed on the other draft plan we got. So I wondered why it wasn't in the presentation, and if you wouldn't mind just kind of talking through that for parents, kind of what that looks like if just the teacher, over the weekend comes back or doesn't come back because they have to quarantine. How does instruction look for the kids?
So the reality is if a teacher has to quarantine, and they've been vaccinated, it's likely that they're symptomatic as well. So therefore they're sick. It's a sick day. So we would have a substitute in, a guest teacher, one of those subs that we already have in our buildings, providing the instruction to our students who are there physically. Again, if they were put into quarantine with their class and they would all just have a virtual experience as we did this past year, it would be unlikely that we would have a faculty member that was quarantined that didn't have symptoms. I don't know that would happen at this point. Because similar to our athletic students, our athletes, is if they are exposed, now it's different if they have COVID, Nora, but you're saying a quarantine. If our athletic students are exposed and they've been vaccinated and don't have symptoms, they don't have to quarantine. It's the same with our faculty. If they've been vaccinated and they don't have symptoms, they don't have to quarantine. If they have COVID, then yes, they would need to stay home.
Okay, but just to clarify it, so it says on here, if the teacher is required by RPS to quarantine, the teacher engages in remote teaching from home.
Because not everybody, everybody's in different circumstances, and there's certain points where we can't share why somebody may be in quarantine and why somebody may not, right? That's beyond the scope of what we'd be permitted to do. To the extent that we can have kids still instructed by their same teacher, given their individual circumstance and situation, that's what we would aim to do. And so in the instances where we can do that, nor we will, but the reason why they may be on quarantine, we can't do anything that would disclose anybody's private information. So might there be random instances? Yes, there might be, where somebody is required to be quarantined. Why or how or from where?
Okay.
Tina and then Liz.
Okay, I'm just trying to clear this, and it's kind of following Rachel, Margaret's, and Nora's questions. I understand why a quarantine will happen if you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, if you're showing symptoms of COVID, right? Let's say there is a X child who is vaccinated showing symptoms of COVID, where as more and more research is coming up, the symptoms, some people show very slight symptoms, but they're testing positive, they just might have a light cold. So my first question is, do they have to test negative before they can come back? And how long does that work? And I think my other comment, if you will, and I mean, obviously you're the educators, it's about equity of learning, right? I understand what Margaret said, but also in high school, if let's say a vaccinated child for just because it is what it is, and it's a global pandemic, you test positive for COVID-19 and you have slight symptoms, you're still sick, but you have light symptoms. Let's say it's a cold and you're testing positive, you cannot come back to school for 6 days, 7 days. And that's where I want to understand, how do they come back to school? Do they have to test negative? But let's say you can't come back. Let's use an example. You can't come back for 5 days and they start on a Monday. For a high school student in an AP class or an honor class, that's a huge chunk of work missing. I understand they have to be independent, but it goes back to the equity of learning. And let's say they have a big test. So it is another stress factor that we need to keep in mind I don't have an answer, you know best. But as we go forward, I think this is something we should keep in mind. Because again, I mean, we are hearing about all these new variants. We don't know how they develop. We don't know how symptoms come up. And obviously vaccinated, unvaccinated, there are just so many unknowns. It's just something I would like to highlight because this will come up and it kind of tallies to everything Nora, Margaret, and Rachel said.
I'm trying to remember the order of your questions. So I'm going to address the one that I'm remembering most, and then
that's fine.
Remind me if there's others, and Susie jump in too. So the rules haven't changed with regards to returning, right? So the rules are still, If you are vaccinated and you've been exposed and you're showing no symptoms, we're not mandating you to be tested in order to return. That's not a requirement.
Okay.
We encourage people to be tested if they've been exposed, vaccinated or not, even if they've been vaccinated, just for information's sake, because there are asymptomatic breakthrough cases that happen, but we're not requiring that for return. If for whatever reason, let's say an unvaccinated individual has been exposed, they can, the permission is that, and this is per the Department of Health, that if they test with a PCR on day 5 and they test negative, they can return starting day 7. A vaccinated person who tests positive has to stay out for the full quarantine period, which I believe is still 14 days.
As for Tina, the consideration about the amount of time that students are missing in school, I think that is going to be a modify and adjust as we go through the process. At this point, we did have a high percentage of families that responded to our spring survey on vaccinations. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but I want to say it was between the 70s and 80%.
With somewhere in that range. Yep.
With the number of students that were vaccinated. So we do anticipate the number of children that would be in that position is going to be a small number, and or they would likely not be feeling well, right? Not their best self, and therefore accessing instruction might be harder. And so they would be making up work just like they do now if they're out sick. Do we miss anything there, Tina? Okay.
You answered it. Thank you.
And Liz, you were next.
So thankfully, lots of my questions got asked. Thanks, Nora. You asked one that was top of mind. I have a couple, but the first one is on the written health and safety plan, page 2. There's not a page number, so my apologies. It talks about efforts to provide vaccinations in the bold, and the statement is, should the need arise, RPS will collaborate with the Department of Public Health to facilitate vaccination efforts. Given that we just got a stat around 70 to 80%, I'd love for you to share with parents and the public what that looks like. So what should means, why would the need arise, and what does that collaboration for facilitating vaccination efforts actually mean?
So similar to what we did this spring with our faculty, and in fact, even with our students, we let families know, we let our faculty know that we had facilities open, that there were appointments available. Same thing with our students. That's what that really means. Whether or not we would have a clinic in town, that doesn't seem like that's even a necessity, but certainly communicating information to families who are looking for a vaccination location, we'd be glad to do that and would plan to do that in collaboration with our Department of Public Health. That's really what that means.
So what is the definition of should the need arise? Why would the need arise if we've got such a high vaccination rate and we got the information that most people knew where to go and all that?
So let's say then the next couple of months, we learned that our under 12s now have the ability to be vaccinated. And parents need appointments and they're having a hard time or they have a difficulty accessing. Similar to what we did this past spring with families, we let them know there were many appointments available in Danbury. There were many appointments available in Ridgefield where kids could access the Pfizer.
Okay, thank you. And then thank you. My second question is really, it's in the academic section, which I know we haven't discussed yet, but it really does address health and safety. So I'm going to ask it now, but feel free to pause and tell me about it later. It's in the first paragraph of the written plan around social and emotional wellness. It talks about schools will regularly assess students' emotional well-being and social well-being. Can you tell us what's different from what you would normally do and how parents will be involved in that evaluation and what kind of curriculum is being used or assessment tools are being used? And will those be shared with parents prior to the start of the school year?
Let me just find where you are.
I'm sorry, there's not page numbers, but it's after the grids. It's after
in the paragraph. So, well, I can answer it without even seeing it. Is when kids are struggling in school, whether that's COVID related, Liz, it's going to be hard to know, right? Kids sometimes struggle with friendships. They struggle with their emotional needs, executive functioning. All of that fits into that bubble. Teachers do a nice job assessing kids, not in a formal assessment necessarily, but rather getting a gauge of what they're seeing and noticing in their classrooms, similar to our pupil personnel services in school, right? Whether that's in a lunch bunch, or a child that may be having trouble making friends, or having trouble keeping themselves organized, or having trouble getting their assignments done. What is the services that we could provide in school? And then if kids need more supports, as I mentioned, I think with Rachel's question, when it came down to a budgetary impact, is what can we provide outside the school day in terms of an extended opportunity for a child? Do they need to have a social group? Do they need to have a one-on-one time with their teacher? A lot of this work we did, luckily for us, in Bridge. It wasn't just about the academic side, which we'll share out in one of our early board meetings, how things went. But it wasn't just about academic, right? It was about getting kids reconnected, their social skills that sometimes can be hard, whether you're a teenager, or I think sometimes it's even harder as a teenager than a younger child. So that's really what that means. Doesn't mean that we're going to pull out some assessment and try to diagnose kids in their transition, but certainly the work that we already do in schools, I'm hopeful that we can tap into kids that are struggling and provide access points for them.
If I could just,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Liz. Sorry.
I was just going to add on to it a couple things. So we have a lot of different things happening with students returning. We have some students who have not been in person all year last year. Paying attention to who those kids are, where they are, is really important. We have some students who have had COVID, and we're starting to learn more, not definitively, but we're starting to learn more about the concept of long COVID and the long-term impacts of and any person, including children. This is becoming more and more research-based, and not something that we think is out there, but something that, research-based medical institutions are telling schools to be prepared for. The concept of assessment is not an evaluation tool that we're administering, but rather the process of the lens in which we look at student behavior, we look at student reaction, and we look at their participation. The state has created access for free in a beta pilot year for all districts, a social emotional, for lack of a better word, this is my word, not their word, screening tool. And it's in a pilot phase this year. Ridgefield has not opted or asked to be part of that right now, because we want to see how it plays out. We don't know a lot about it. We don't know what the information is going to be used for. And so we're not opting to be part of one of the 75 districts in the state who's going to give it a try. Could it be something that we come back to this board in a year or in 2 years to say, hey, the state made this available, all these districts did it, this is what the information tells us? For sure, we would come to the board and share all that information and a plan for how we would use the information. But as of right now, there's no plan to use that. And then in addition, with regards to communicating with families and updating families about any assessment information as it's gained, that would be what comes out through parent-teacher communications, through the team model at the middle school level, grade level conversations with parents at the elementary level, their school counselor, pupil personnel. So the expectation would not be that we're administering a tool that's going to collect data and be housed somewhere that's going to track a child. That's not what that refers to at all.
Okay. Can I just read back what I've heard so far, just to make sure I'm tracking? So there'll be no formal assessments that are introduced this year at the beginning of the school year to regularly assess the social and emotional learning. Is that true?
No, that's true. There's no tool that we're administering, no.
And the results of any assessment will be shared with parents proactively, whether it's informal or formal, through today's mechanisms. There'll be no additional in-school services that are provided to students without parents' knowledge and awareness.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one other piece I think that families, I'm sure, know about, but just in case they don't, is not only SRBI or MTSS doesn't only service the academic side. That's never been what it's done. It services certainly mathematics and reading, but it also services the social emotional needs of kids. And those needs vary. Those needs vary from a child's inability to sit on a rug to a child's behavior where it might be physical versus internal versus external versus acute versus long-term. Those processes and structures are already in place in our schools. And so tapping into those to provide services for kids outside of the school day, if they need them, is hopefully a resource that we have certainly going into this school year. I don't know about after that, but the ESSER grant will allow for that, which is a great benefit.
Thank you.
Questions? Tina, you have another question?
Sorry, this is easy, but
Oh.
first, I just want to say thank you. Thank you that you're keeping the social emotional health of kids in mind. I know we always talk about it. We just don't know how this will play out when they come back to school, how this will look, how the last year will outplay in their learning loss and everything. So thank you for keeping that in the forefront. And I hope you keep updating even the board if there are areas of concern or there's something that the board can do to, help. Totally shifting gears. I mean, if this was shared, I missed it, and I apologize on that. We've not talked about transportation, and are we asking parents to opt out this year? Did I miss that? Or we're not, or yeah, sorry.
So we are not, actually, there was a concern that was raised and questioned, a good one, about whether or not there were going to be issues with transportation in terms of providers and staffing, because there was a communication that was shared out. Well, I think a lot of transportation companies have been sharing the concern about staffing, and so that's been public, but there was also a communication that was distributed by First Student, our primary transportation provider, to communities talking about the staffing shortages. Dawn reached out to First Student, and so it's true. There are staffing shortages, and that's an accurate assumption, that's an accurate statement. However, at this point, Ridgefield luckily is not in that position. We're not in the same ideal position that we've been in years past, but we're probably a driver or two shorter than we've been. So according to First Student, we're in a good place. As for the opt-in, opt-out, no, that's not something we're putting in place this year. However, you might remember that in our strategic planning conversations, we did talk about having a better sense of who's actually accessing the transportation to see whether or not in the future there can be efficiencies that are made. So families will receive a questionnaire within the next few days, asking them what their choice is. That said, that's going to run parallel to everything that we've always experienced with transportation. There's no shift for this coming year, but that parallel work will be happening to determine whether or not there can be efficiencies from the number of parents that are opting in and out. Hopefully I answered your question, Tina.
Thank you.
A lot of good questions, a lot of good responses on the Safe Return Plan. Are there any more questions regarding the Safe Return, or should we move on to the RHS interim bell schedule? Okay, thank everybody for that conversation. We can move on to the RHS bell schedule for next year.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I have Dr. Greenwood, Mr. Yeagood, and Mr. Pepe here tonight, and they're going to talk through the interim bell schedule for the 21-22 school year. It's quite similar actually to what our students experienced this past year with a few shifts. And I think more important than the shifts are the opportunities that the high school will have in terms of studying what works best for kids, not only on the academic side, but on the social emotional side. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Greenwood.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Hello, everyone. Nice to see everybody after the summer, and nice to be back. I have two of my assistant principals with here today. Thank you, Susie, for introducing them. I have Jared Pepe with me. He actually does the scheduling. He puts the sections into the computer and makes them all roll. So we can talk about that a little bit. And I have Michael Yeagood with me. He has been working with about 35 teachers on a scheduling committee for 3 years, predating COVID. So there's a little bit of history here. And normally in a presentation like this, I think we would give you the why and then show the schedule, but a high school schedule isn't always super intuitive. So we're gonna do the presentation, I'd say slightly different, which is I'm gonna have Mr. Yeagood show you the schedule, then I'll give you the why, and then I'll have Mr. Pepe talk a little bit about how it actually has rolled out this year, and then we'll do some questions. So I hope that's okay with everyone to kind of do a deconstructed presentation. And if that's okay, then John, you can skip it, and I'll have Mike Yeagood take over.
Sure, thanks, Jake. So just a little bit of history. So as Dr. Greenwood said, we started a scheduling committee back in the 17-18 school year. So towards the end of that school year, really just to explore the other scheduling options that were out there. So we had been in our 8-day rotating drop one schedule for almost a decade at that point, and we were just looking to see if there was maybe something better that we could use at the high school. So we went on multiple site visits. We talked to teachers across the state, really across the country, looking at schedules. And that scheduling committee ultimately landed on a good option to explore would be a block schedule. However, after surveying the students and staff multiple times, we really landed in a spot where there was no real catalyst to change from the 8-day rotating drop one. It seemed to be working for everybody. Students were able to earn the 25 credits that they needed for graduation, and things were going along well. So we decided not to move forward with a change and stick with that rotating schedule. And then along came COVID. And so we pivoted last summer to a block schedule. The rationale behind that was that we could limit the number of interactions that students and staff were having during the day by limiting the number of classrooms they were in. We can limit the number of transitions during the day, and hopefully, that would be healthier for everybody. And so, that worked well for the 2021 school year. And really, we began planning the schedule for the 21-22 school year in late winter, early spring, prior to us having a vaccine, prior to us knowing exactly who was going to have access to a vaccine. And so really the thinking behind this schedule that you're looking at now, which is another block schedule, was the same rationale. With the unknowns out there, the block schedule limits the interactions that students would have during the day. It limits the number of transitions. And so again, without knowing where we would be, we felt like this was the healthiest place to go. So the schedule that you're looking at is not the permanent RHS schedule. Dr. Green will talk a little bit further about that. It's a block schedule. It's not rotating. So you'll see that first period and fifth period always meet first, or section 1 and section 5 always meet during first period in the day. 4 and 8 always meet last period during the day. We're returning to our 7:25 to 2:15 timeframe, as we discussed in the reopening plan. So that gives us approximately 82-minute classes. You'll see that the second block there is a little bit longer to help account for we have our morning announcements during that time. The middle of the day is 134 minutes. That's our you have 82 minutes of learning, you have passing time, and a lunch block built into that. And you'll see that between the periods, we do have a little bit longer passing time. So historically, we had a 5-minute passing time, but our building is very large. We have a lot of students. The hallways are crowded. So to give students and teachers the time to travel from one end of the building to the other, decompress, refocus, get ready to re-engage in some learning, we did extend the passing time to 9 minutes in this schedule. So another interesting feature you'll see is that you can see that the periods are broken down into 2 sections. So there's, you'll see period 1A and 1B, period 2A and 2B. So that allows for us to also utilize a half block. And so we are returning this year to having our traditional science labs. So 1 out of the 2 days in the schedule will be an extended period for science to have extended time to engage in labs. We're also going to utilize those half blocks for some developmental guidance. I think Jarrett Pepe will be talking about that a little bit later. We also, our IS classes or resource classes or special education courses, some of them are slated to be halftime. And so instead of a student meeting for an 82-minute block and then not seeing their special education class or case manager for another 4 days, we decided to split those in half. And so they would see their teacher every other day for a 41-minute block. And then we also have a new intervention this year, these Algebra 1 learning labs that, again, Mr. Pepe will talk about in a little bit. So I know that sounds maybe a little bit confusing. So the next slides, we have some sample student schedules to look at. So this schedule here, so each tone is a different class. So this would maybe be like a freshman or sophomore class. The purplish color that you see in section 1, maybe that's in English. Section 2 is a math class. Section 4, you can see towards the bottom that has the different tones of yellow. So that would be a split class where the lighter tone is maybe an IS or a special education literacy course that meets for 41 minutes every other day, while the darker yellow tone is the IS special education numeracy course that meets again for 41 minutes every other day. You'll also notice the orange color, so that would be representative of a science class. So you can see it meets in section 2B and 3A. That's their core class. But then section 3B would be the lab course or the lab portion of the course. So this, again, we tried to create the schedule to mimic as close to the 8-day rotating drop one as possible. So the lab period in this class brings us very close to the amount of time that we had in that historic schedule. So it would allow us to complete the curriculum. Without that lab, we would be losing about 20 hours of instruction over the year, and we can talk about that a little bit later. You'll also notice in the lower right-hand side in section 7, there's an extra little red block there. So that is time that would be reserved for, in this case, for maybe a freshman Algebra 1 lab, or that may be the time that's reserved for the developmental guidance for students to meet during that time. Click to the next schedule. So this looks very similar. So this would be for a junior or senior. Again, so juniors and seniors are required to take 6 classes, but the vast majority take 7 courses. So again, the green might be English, the yellow might be math, and you'll see the science represented in blue here. So the core class meets during sections in section 5, but period 1A and 1B, but then it has that extra little half block in section 6 during period 2A. You'll also see the light pink in section 6. So again, that would be reserved for, it's opposite their science lab. So that's a block of time that's available. That time would be reserved for the developmental guidance course. And then you'll see section 8 here is a gray color. Again, that's an extra class beyond the 6 that are required. So that would be an elective of some sort. So in our 8-day rotating drop 1 schedule, we had approximately 1,000 hours, 1,003 hours of instructional time throughout the year. So last year with our block schedule, due to us having a staggered entry and staggered dismissal, we had 920 hours of instruction. With this block schedule as is, we have 963 hours of instruction throughout the year. So obviously this is a decrease of 40 hours of instructional time from our pre-COVID 8-day rotating drop 1 schedule. However, we believe that we're gaining a lot by shifting to this schedule. We do believe that we're gaining social and emotional benefits for our students. So there's, this schedule offers a slower pacing throughout the day. We're only shifting into 4 different subjects instead of shifting into 7 different subjects throughout the day. The longer amounts of time, again, in our studies through the committee, and lots of research has been done as far as high school schedules go. The longer blocks of time allow teachers to dive deeper into subject matter instead of just having sort of a fragmented approach in a shorter block schedule or a shorter time frame. The longer blocks of time have proven to allow students the time to provide to reflect on their learning, to ask questions, to get more one-on-one instruction or small group instruction. Another benefit is that instructors are seeing fewer students, so they're seeing the same amount of students, they have the same course load, but instructors are seeing fewer students per day for longer amounts of time. So again, allowing instructors to get to know their students better, get to interact with them more, and again, in those smaller groups or possibly even one-on-one. The longer blocks allow time for innovation, and there's also huge benefit to our electives, especially the arts. In the short amount of time, if you imagine an orchestra or a wind ensemble, in a 40-minute block, they're spending 5 minutes setting up, 10 minutes warming up, and then they only have maybe 25 minutes to actually play before they have to break down and pack away their instruments. So these longer blocks of time allow for, and you can, imagine the same in all of the arts, our tech classes, our culinary classes. These longer blocks of time allow for some real engagement by our students. So I do just want to point out that there's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of there was a lot of time spent trying to find the right balance in how long is a long block. How long can we make it before it becomes too long for students? Maybe they'll become disengaged. Figuring out how much passing time there is. And so there's a very, very fine balance between trying to figure out exactly how to place the time throughout the day. If we were to add, a minute per day per class, that actually adds up to 12 hours of instructional time throughout the year. And so there's a fine balance that we're trying to work with here, but we do feel like we landed on a strong schedule.
So I want to jump in and piggyback on what Mr. Yeager was saying, because, we're not moving forward with what we're considering our permanent schedule yet. We're going to bring that to you hopefully in the spring, because we do want to collect some more information, because we want to do it right. We want to do what's best for our kids. And we know that coming out of last year, we need more time. And that's just a reality. And so, we're partly here asking you for that, to show you a schedule that we believe is good for our kids and good for this year, but acknowledging the fact that we do need more time in order to make sure that we're doing what's right for our kids. Because last year was just, so challenging in so many ways. And so the question is, back where, again, I think this presentation, a lot of places would have started, but I wanted you to see the schedule. So why did we end up with this schedule? So just to reiterate, this is a 3-year staff committee that Mr. Yeager's been running with 35 classroom teachers. They've done site visits, Danbury, Greenwich, New Fairfield. They've really canvassed the area, gone to schools, collected data, talked to administrators, talked to teachers, talked to students in other schools. They've also been doing a lot of research, reading some texts and articles on the outside, been sharing information. So this, we didn't move forward with a block schedule, sort of blindly. It really is based on our best practices and best information for our students and how they're learning right now. Secondarily, we've been collecting survey results. And again, Mike spoke about that prior to the pandemic. We've been collecting data on time use and scheduling from our students and from our teachers. And then through the school year, we did a couple of surveys. We had some quantitative and qualitative surveys, had great responses. Our kids were amazing. When you ask them about the schedule, they do a really good job. They do want to talk to you about the schedule. So the last one we gave right before school ended, once the seniors had left, we asked the underclassmen. We had 756 underclassmen respond. So you can imagine with 400 seniors out, they only left a couple of hundred kids who didn't respond. So pretty amazing. Over 114 teachers. So we feel like we do have good quantitative data to back up where we are. And as a jumping point for the data that we want to collect moving forward on time use, on a period length, and that's on the next slide. And I'll jump to that too. And also I want not yet, John. Also, I want to talk a little bit about so why this schedule. And again, I think Mike did a good job, so I won't go back over this, but it does produce this time that our teachers are craving. They lost time with kids last year. They're feeling they want to interact with their kids. They want to really get down close, individualize, differentiate, all those things that they really didn't feel or felt were really challenging last year. And we really need to provide them that time so they can really work with students and also put them back into cooperative learning. So we're going back to science labs, getting back into group work. We really think it's important to provide them time for that. The consistency and predictability, everything we're reading over and over again, whether it's coming from the state or from researchers and all different, is provide kids consistency, and going back into the 8-period dropping, rotating really doesn't do that. So the consistency and the predictability we felt was really important. And the schedule is really easily adjustable for advisory and special schedules. It's really a lot easier when doing 4 periods a day versus 8 rotating and dropping. And last is flexibility. And unfortunately, we do believe it's really important to keep a flexible schedule, because though we all want to move forward with it as close to normal as possible, there is a reality that in the state's planning, they've continually said, be ready to be flexible. And so that's why we don't want to veer too far off a schedule that we were able to make work last year. So that also is helpful in looking at the schedule. So that flexibility really can't be discounted. Okay, John. I just want to make sure everybody knows the committee also has picked a book as part of our school goal. So staff development using some of our Thursday collaborative time, a minimum of once a month. We're going to be working through this book called Tools for Teaching in the Block. And so we are putting professional development time at the school level. We're not just saying teachers go teach. We're really going to work with them through the department leaders and also through the department so they can talk about how's it going, what does it look like, how can we improve. And so this is a book that we're going to be using as a resource throughout the year. So what are the questions that we have? And of course, you may have some more for us now as we're getting ready to, coming near the end here. But questions that we're seeking to answer for ourselves throughout the school year before we come back to you in the spring. One is to continue to collect feedback from our community. That's students and parents and staff on period length, the amount of time that they're in the classes, passing time length, and also the amount of time that they're in lunch and the number of lunch waves. We have 4 right now, but we know many schools are on a 3 lunch wave schedule. And so that's still on our minds. We've been talking a lot about this idea of a flex period. Some of our counterparts are using flex periods. So these are periods in the day that aren't scheduled for class, but are used for intervention and extension, tailored more specifically to individual students versus being in a set class. We looked at versions of this schedule that had it during the school day, that had it at the end of the school day, that had the beginning of the school day. We looked at our counterparts who have it in all those different places. We had produced a draft that we liked that had it at the beginning of the school day. But once we sat down and looked at just the challenges of coming back to full in-person instruction, the PD that would be involved with our staff, in terms of using the flexible scheduler, which allows students and staff to schedule their time, the unpredictability of the school year as it rolls out. We just really didn't feel like taking on that initiative on top of going to a block and also working through some of the things like the math labs, bring the science labs back, developmental counseling. It seems like a lot to put on the teachers coming back. So our goal through the scheduling committee is to work on a time throughout this school year to pilot that for hopefully doing it and coming to you that we're going to be presenting a schedule. We do it once and we do it right. And so that's really our plan to work on throughout the school year and hopefully get a pilot off the ground of this idea of a flex period. And the last thing is the use of these half blocks. We're using it for science labs, for interventions, for student services, but we have seen other schools have taken, for instance, half-year electives and taught them every other day for a full school year. So that's just one example of a use for a half block that might help us in terms of scheduling and letting more kids take more variety of courses. So I think there's some benefits of the half blocks, and we gotta have to live it a little bit and get some feedback from our students and from our teachers and see what that might look like and bring that back to you too. The last slide here that we have, I'm going to throw back over to Jarrett because I just want you to know we have been physically scheduling this, and I want you to know that as we look at it, I think you'll be pleased to see that we've had some really good success with getting our kids into the classes that they want to take, even in this new schedule. So I'll throw it over to Jarrett, and then we'll go right to questions if that's all right.
Thanks, Jake. Hi, everyone. So I'll just go over some of the highlights of our current scheduling process. And we're definitely proud to say that our individual student requests continue to lead us through the scheduling process. So we take student requests, we take parent input during our scheduling process, teacher recommendations, specialized needs for our students, and we really pull all together to make the students drive the formation of our schedule. And as was highlighted before by Mr. Yeagan and Dr. Greenwood, we did put our science labs back into our block schedule. And we really feel like this extra time allows students to go into more depth for experimentation, for hands-on work. Our science teachers found it difficult in past with a number of transitions and the shortened periods. So they're really looking forward to this extra time that we have in place for the next coming school year. Another exciting thing is our developmental counseling program. So with all the concerns in general that face teenagers in high school, COVID really added on to that, we feel like. So the developmental counseling is a nice proactive way to get counseling initiatives out and to get these things built into student schedules. In the past, the guidance department's been amazing with counseling initiatives and getting, creative things to support student needs. In this way, students are going to meet their counselors. They're going to have individual lessons to start the year off. So we really feel like in response to COVID and just, good practice, it's going to be a lot more of a proactive intervention for our students in the high school. Another one of our newer initiatives is our Algebra 1 Intervention Lab. And as Mr. Yeager said, that piece will bounce off the science lab. So it won't take up any time out of a student's schedule other than maybe a free period. But that'll allow students to really get extra support. All of our research and data shows how important Algebra 1 is fundamentally to students to be successful in not only high school math, but post-secondary. If students don't gain that confidence in algebra skills, they have a real tough time moving on to more advanced coursework. So in working with our middle schools, we developed placement criteria, and we're going to start the year with a certain number of students in those labs, and we will have the flexibility to move kids in and out as the year goes on. And then just looking at our overall scheduling picture, we're proud to say we have 197 unique course offerings at the high school, inclusive of our special ed classes and counseling labs. We're going to be running 982 course sections, and that's led by 149 unique staff members. And out of our 14,515 requests, we're proud to say over 98% of those will be met when we roll out those student schedules. So that's a quick run through of where we are right now.
Thank you, Jarrett. So
So
I
that
think
was-
we can.
Yep, go ahead.
I was going to say we can open it up to questions, but I just want to take a moment because I know how hard this team has been working, not just this summer, but obviously, as you heard, for 3 years, not just the people that are here, the people at the school. And I appreciate all the efforts and the thinking. And we've done a lot of pushing back and pushing forward, and they've really just ebbed and flowed with what was right for kids. So, I'm really proud of the work that they've done. And just as Dr. Greenwood mentioned, it's a work in progress. This year, I think we'll certainly provide a lot of input onto how shifts should happen in future years. Okay, now we'll open it up.
Okay, I think Kathleen was first and then Tina.
First of all, thank you. And I have no questions about the block scheduling and all the work that's done. I really think it's the forward thinking. It's what best practices say. And it is, I'm amazed that you folks have come this far. And particularly last year, you were able to reflect on what happened and move forward. All I want to put out there, and I don't want to put it on your team because you've done all the heavy lifting and are looking at this and moving forward. But I know, having been on the board almost now 4 years, this is one of the things that was brought up previously that could help our thinking about creating healthy start times for all of our students. And I would hope with all of this creative thinking and all of this work that we don't miss the opportunity to maybe again re-look at how this could maybe help align all of our healthy start times for all of our students, not just our high school students. So in no way is this reflective of the team that's working there, but I really think that this creative forward thinking can help us move forward and moving towards that goal for all students. Thank you.
Thanks.
Tina, you're next.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It's incredible what you're offering. I mean, I know the fact that 98% children are getting their first choice is amazing. I can imagine the hard work you put in, the fact that these kids have so many options. I mean, I thought I went to a great school, but I wish I could go back and have more of these course offerings. So thank you. I know the incredible hard work that goes into putting these schedules and making sure all these kids' first choices are met. So I do not want to take anything away from that. My first is a comment, and it kind of follows with what Kathleen said. I think it's more a comment, and the board can look into it. And this is nothing to take away, absolutely nothing to take away with what you presented. The one thing that, if the one small positive, if you will, is from the pandemic was we could shift our times kind of a little bit later, and it aligned with the needs for, it aligned. I'm not talking about the later school elementary time. That's a whole different topic. But by and large, we could do it with zero cost, and we could have a shorter day. I understand why we're going back to a longer day. I completely get it. Learning loss, we want to address this. But I think my first concern or a comment, if you will, is that we do have the longest day. And from my conversations with parents around town and people who've lived here, I believe that we started adding to this day the fact that we have one of the longest days is because in the late 90s, and I could be totally wrong, is we wanted to have more academic excellence. And I understand that, that is what we're known for. But as we look at the social emotional part of this, is having the longest day, does it tie up, how it ties up, something the board can look forward. The board can talk about this as we move forward, as a new board comes on, just throwing it out, nothing to do, just wanted to mention this. And the other concern, not a concern, a comment, once the schools get, the bell schedules went off, and it is a point of view, it is not the point of view. I'm sure people have different opinions, but the more parents I talk to, the common thread that I received was the flex schedule. It just seemed to make sense. And I understand why we're not doing it this year, but as we move forward, it just makes so much sense, either at the start or the end of the day. And the reason I say that is because there's universal access, right? So if the bus is dropping a child at 7:25, and if the teachers have to be there or they're at the end of the day, it just gives them access for extra help, for clubs, if you will, and it won't interfere with the other after school activities, be it sports, be it work, be it anything else. And just a thought. So I personally, I do understand and support the flex schedule. So these are just comments, concerns. You don't have to answer them. I'm just sharing them, not taking away from the work.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, Susie.
Tina, the only point, I think it's really just important to note that anytime we make a shift in school start time, there is an impact on transportation. So therefore there is a cost. I'm not suggesting that we don't study it and understand what that cost would be, but ultimately there is going to be a cost because we know that one tier impacts the other tier that impacts the other. I think your point is well taken with the flex schedule, and it certainly is something that the team is looking at and thinking thoughtfully about it, whether or not it's at the start of the day, in the middle of the day, where it's placed. And Dr. Greenwood could speak more about what the consideration is and when that time will be to possibly bring in the flex schedule. But the one piece that I think we felt, at least at this point, is that we needed a little bit more time to study it. Jake, did I miss anything?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was going to say something, but I think I would have said exactly the same. Is the more we thought about it, the more we said to ourselves, and I don't mean to say it repetitively, but we wanted to do it one time and do it right. With all the, one of the reasons for going to the schedule was trying to put some consistency into the students' lives. So to add something in that was a bit of an unknown for us in terms of PD, student time, use of the time, student engagement, supervision. The list kept growing, and there was a point where we said to ourselves, let's just pump the brakes, because we got a lot of other moving pieces right now that are new, and look towards a pilot. And we've looked at a couple of different I've had a couple different conversations with the committee in terms of maybe we're doing it, I know, after AP exams, maybe during the middle of the day at some point, maybe as part of an advisory schedule. So we have some ideas of ways, but I really think it'd be best for us to at this point to have more conversations with Susie and with Liz and Corey about what that looks like with time use, and then come up with a really good time where we're going to do it and publicize it well to the community. It just feels like a better move for us to be sure that we're collecting the correct data, and we can get feedback from you, maybe even at that point in terms of time use and what time looks like. We can kind of do that together. But that's where we ended up.
Thank you. And the question I'm sure every child will be, are we going to have open campus this year? How will that look? Because I know it was a privilege for junior or maybe seniors, I'm sorry, but are we going to have that for kids? How will that look?
Yeah, so we actually are going to go back to our normal system, which is open campuses for 12th grade. Again, there's a lot of history in Ridgefield as to why open campuses for 12th grade only. If we were going to move towards open campus for other grades, 9, 10, and 11, I would want that to come from our students. I don't want our students to be presenting that to you. I would want us to be having a community conversation about that, because as soon as you're putting kids, you're opening campus, you're putting them in cars, there's another whole level in terms of boards and litigation, all kinds of other little pieces that we would have to have a conversation about. We certainly did it this year as an emergency response to a pandemic. We're feeling comfortable going back to current policies for the 12th graders. I'd love to have the kids stand in front of you folks if they're going to go a different direction. I just think that's the right way to do it.
Thank you. Agreed. Thank you.
Next up, I see Rachel.
Good evening. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciate your dedication, all of your hard work. It was a 3-year committee, so thank you again. I do have a lot of questions, but I'm confident that they could be answered. I just think that they're really important to bring up for purpose of conversation. So just bear with me. So the first one is this schedule, if this schedule is implemented, will you be following a review process, collecting data and feedback on its implementation along the way, just not at the end with a survey?
Yes, the scheduling committee still meets regularly. Mr. Yeager runs that. They meet at least a few times a quarter. And the surveys that we use, qualitative and quantitative, with some minor tweaks, going to keep as many of the questions the same as we can. So we have longitudinal data over time from last year into this year to collect.
And I know you had brought it up, Dr. Greenwood, but where were some of the site visits again, and what type of feedback came from those visits?
Sure. So some of the schools that we went to, Danbury, Greenwich, New Fairfield, and really was looking at the use of the block itself and getting into classes, observing teachers using the block. And a lot of those schools, or I think all of those schools now, have flex periods. And a lot of those conversations are around what are some of the pitfalls you fell into when implementing the flex and how we could avoid them. And Mike, I don't know if there's more that he wants to add to that, but that's just sort of a quick overview.
Yeah, no, not too much, except for the fact that every school we went to, students and teachers both just sung the praises of the block schedule, just stating how the pace of the day just felt like it was less hectic, how there was more time. Students had less homework assigned every night because they were getting homework from 4 classes instead of 7. And so it just allows for students to actually engage in their learning instead of feeling like they're on the hamster wheel of running through 7 classes a day and trying to keep up.
And then I guess to piggyback off of that, do you have a sample teacher schedule, or maybe can you describe it? You know, do teachers have ample planning time with the block schedule? Even though it may seem that instructional hours are decreasing, my feeling is that it doesn't mean our teachers are working any less. It feels more of a restructure of their time during the day, especially if you look at the last bullets in the presentation.
Yeah, so we had a conversation today, Mike and I, about whether we should or shouldn't put a sample teacher schedule in there. And it was like, oh, let's keep it focused on the kids. So I'm glad you asked. I'll let Mike speak to it though.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously a teacher's instructional time in the classroom is decreased because the overall instructional hours are decreased, but they're in the building the same amount of time. They're still working the same amount of time. Obviously, there is going to be a bit more planning this year, especially, you know, planning for kids coming back from a disrupted year and a half. But also just the fact that you are now teaching in person in a block. You know, we need to rethink about how the curriculum pacing looks. And so again, you know, the teacher schedule looks very similar. They have about the same amount of time in the classroom during the day. They still have some planning and prep periods. They still have supervisory duties where they'll be in and around the building helping students, maybe in a study hall or in the cafeteria. So the teacher schedule throughout the day looks similar. You know, they all have the same teaching load, you know, so that they had prior to COVID. So it's the same amount of classes that they're teaching in their contracts.
Okay. If they don't see some students over a longer period of time, would they not be creating that consistency and continuity of learning? Is the block schedule better for some disciplines and not for all? Or is our approach that it is only going to be for some disciplines and not across the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think unilaterally, any schedule you look at for a high school is going to have pros and cons. So for every con you find, you know, in the block schedule, you're going to find it equal for the straight 8 or you know, or rotating drop schedule. So there's no doubt that you're always going to find pros and cons in all the schedules. In terms of consistency, you're definitely right. So again, some of the disciplines say, yes, this is great. Every other day works great. Others are feeling like we're not 100% sure what this might look like in the long run. But again, between the site visits, the research, the reading, this is the direction that, you know, progressive schools are heading and majority of schools are heading right now. And again, I think with our the addition of the half blocks for things like science labs, interventions, student support services. We are putting those in on the opposite days. So for our some of our, if you will, needier learners, they are gonna get a more consistent access to their teachers. So we believe we put a lot of provisions in place for exactly what you're talking about in terms of consistency.
Okay, and then I think that actually kind of answered my next question. I'm going to ask it, but I think the access to the teacher would help here. So I thought about, you know, some pitfalls or challenges. I think about students and their attention spans, having difficulty sitting in a class for that long and not being able to retain information and not seeing the teacher consecutively. So a part of that, I don't want to answer for you, but I just want to reiterate what I was hearing is that because in the schedule, they would have access to the teacher, that would be a little bit of a proactive approach than a reactive approach to help them.
Yeah, you're definitely right. So, you know, we've moved in the past years into a student-centered teaching approach, really puts the student at the center of the teaching, and the 42-minute period, you know, just by and large is not conducive. By the time the kids sit down and engage, the teachers give a portion of the lesson, go over some of the learning from the day before, to sit down and really have them engaging with the learning at a student-centered approach really is just incredibly challenging in 42 minutes. And so that's really the largest impetus for breaking it out to 80 minutes, because our teachers are saying, because of the way that we're teaching our students, we can use the time more effectively, and we're not expecting them to stand in front of the students for 82 minutes and talk and the kids to sit. We really are expecting them to be engaging with the learning. And that also plays into the professional development plans that we have lined up throughout the year to effectively use the time. But you're correct.
Okay, and then I have two more questions. What were the survey questions that you used and what were their results?
So the surveys were a little, I don't have the survey sitting right in front of me. Some of the questions were almost, I want to say sort of vanilla in terms of the, you know, amount of time that's in the block. And then we put it as, you know, like agree, strongly agree, disagree, in terms of, you know, the block for our kids who've been there before, the block versus the 42-minute periods, the dismissal and arrival, questions about student engagement, questions about amount of time you had to do things like go to the bathroom, get down, change your books over, access to your teachers. And so I scoped down just a little bit of the data from the 756 kids. You know, how many, you know, positive response to the block, 70% of the kids were positive. In terms of time management, helping them increase their time management skills, 80% of the kids had positive responses. Focus and attention throughout the block, 57% of the kids were positive and 27% said that it was neutral. So we knew that was an area of focus, exactly what we just spoke about. And the same with the teachers. Of 114 teachers, same questions. The block, they had an 80% positive experience this past school year. You know, it goes on and on. I could give you access to it. It's not as if it's embargoed information, because it's all, you know, it's all anonymous survey information. But again, we wouldn't definitely not be standing here if it wasn't a positive response. We easily could have gone back to our regular schedules that are still glued to the wall. But we really had positive responses from the kids and felt like it was the right thing to do in terms of, you know, coming out of the pandemic and hopefully moving beyond it and getting back into the intervention and moving in direction of ownership, student ownership of the learning.
And then I think Dr. Greenwood, I think you kind of answered my last question a little bit. So my last question was, you know, what has the teacher feedback on block schedules been? You know, they could be sitting at home right now watching this saying, oh my goodness, this is horrible. Don't do this year. Or they might be saying, you know, no, this is great. This is the best decision because of what we went through this year. And you said that in the survey result, it was 80% were positive.
Yeah, I can tell you as a new principal sitting in front of you, if they were telling me don't do it, I wouldn't be sitting here in front of the schedule, because that probably wouldn't be great. No, they were, and through the committee work, we presented stuff along the way, got a lot of feedback. And again, I didn't come in and change a schedule. This was something that, you know, Mike's been working on with them for a number of years. It was a direction that they were headed. Just we happened to get a little bit of a kick in you know, last year, and now that we're there, the response is overwhelming that they want to stay. They don't want to drop back only to maybe end up in the same place. They want to keep the momentum moving in the right direction. So yes, the response from the faculty has been quite positive. In fact, they're saying, "Let's go, let's get moving, let's get used to this, let's get moving in that direction."
Well, thank you so much for fielding all my questions. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Rachel, you all done?
Yes.
Sean? Sean, you're on mute.
I think I heard you mention, to dovetail what Rachel said, that the students were not necessarily in favor of block schedules. I asked my kid that a year and 2 years ago and got a non-committal, I don't like block schedules, but what's been the overarching feeling from the students about this?
Yeah, no, the students were in favor of it. Over 70% of them were in favor of it. The
Okay.
question we had worked on was around student focus and attention span. And that's where we focus our professional learning for the coming year, being sure that we're really addressing that during the longer block period. They like the block in terms of more access to the teachers, being able to engage in the learning. It really was about, their own personal focus and how we can work with our own teaching practices to be sure that we're engaging them properly. But by and large, again, over 70% of them said, yes, please stick with the block. They liked it.
And
Awesome.
I do want to note that the engagement question was asked during the pandemic. So that was, we had shifting schedules, and some were remote, some were in person. And so, not to say it shouldn't be the area of focus, but it was also that data was collected during the height of the pandemic.
So sample size messy. Got it. So we're moving the bell time from what, 5 minutes to 9 minutes? Is that what I heard?
Passing time.
The passing time.
Passing time. Yeah. It was 5 before.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, I know that, we were talking about all this start time stuff, and the only way to get there was to blow all the air out of the schedule with passing times and block schedules and flex schedules and all that stuff. Never mind the $2.8 million that the price tag came up with, and the 4-tier bus schedule needs to be reconciled. But I appreciate the 3-year effort. I love the continued work on the schedule. And this gets, the high school kids a lot closer to what a college schedule would look like. So I kind of love that idea.
Thank you.
Just an observation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Other questions? Tina?
I'm sorry. Just a question. We talked about Algebra 1 intervention. From my understanding, this is more focused to the rising freshmen, right? But I also want to highlight, and I maybe have an answer to this. There was the rising sophomores missed a huge chunk of algebra, because of the pandemic, and we shut down schools. So are we going to embrace them or, kind of develop that in for the rising sophomores also? Because I've sat through enough to understand how vital Algebra 1 is as they go forward. So will that be something we will be, you are considering? I'm sorry, that's what I'm.
Yeah, as the year closed out, I know our math department was really focused on, what students' learning needs would be as they enter the year. So in the past, a lot of the early, freshman courses would do a lot of pre-assessments, but honestly, some of the other classes really started off pretty quick and expected the students to have a lot of knowledge behind them already. And in talking with the math department, they're really on board for a lot more pre-assessment work, small groups to really identify students' needs early on in response to to what occurred. And we're hoping that the Algebra 1 labs gives us a nice template to see how we can map out some more interventions in the future. So definitely a concern of us and the math teachers as well.
Just so that I'm clear, and parents listening are clear, especially the rising sophomores, you are going to keep the sophomores who are struggling if they need into this, right? You could put them, envelope them into this class if needed, because there is a concern among those parents.
Yes. So our rising ninth graders are the ones who would be taking Algebra 1. And so this half block intervention is focused on the rising ninth graders in Algebra 1. It's not focused on rising 10th graders in geometry. So we understand that there could be gaps in their learning, but that could be in any class coming out of the pandemic. And so I think what Jared was trying to say is, our teachers are keen to that. Coming out in the spring, we spent a lot of time working with Corey, with the department chairs, in terms of learning loss and trying to find out where were the learning losses and what are we going to do to remediate that moving right into the beginning of the school year. We have some nice documents, and I'm sure we could talk about that at a different meeting, but we do have some nice documents all worked out, and our department chairs and teachers are definitely ready for that. The algebra has been, a topic of conversation amongst this district and in the school for a long time, and I can attest to that. And so this is a different approach. Instead of adding more levels, and instead of trying to kind of remediate them within the confines of the class, really taking, using the data we have coming out of 8th grade, identifying our kids absolutely as early as possible who potentially have areas of weakness coming right into 9th grade. We're going to grab them right away and do the best we can to identify, remediate, and work with them. And then if they meet goals, they can move out. And any kids who are struggling throughout the year, we can move them in. And we've done this, frankly, at a 0 FTE. And that's important to us in terms of getting off the ground, to be perfectly blunt. To moving into geometry, I don't think I could make that same guarantee for you right now. So we're going to get it off the ground. We're going to get it going, get it moving, and then hopefully come to you with a proposal moving forward if it's successful. So that's why it's focused on Algebra 1 right now.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions on the RHS interim schedule? If not, thank you very much. It was very informative. Again, a lot of good questions, a lot of good answers, and we can move right into information items at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Greenwood, Mr. Yeager, Mr. Pepe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have 2 items of information for you tonight. The first one is just a simple update on the alternative high school in the 18 to 22 program. You may remember this past spring, we shared with you that we were looking for, no pun intended, an alternative space for the alternative high school. We have not allocated that space yet. We're exploring a couple of options, but at this point that's still on hold. In the meantime, and simultaneously, our lease is actually up with the Housing Authority. And I imagine many of our board members would not have been on the board at that time. Just about 10 years ago, there was a lease that outlines what the expectations are for the Board of Education and for the Housing Authority, and being sure that we're following those expectations. That said, there's a lot of work that has to happen to that space to meet the needs of our students for the fall until we find another space. And that's also the same for the 18 to 22 program. So what we've done is we've prioritized a list that actually needs to happen, not only for our kids, but actually to really comply with what's outlined in the lease. What's different with the alternative high school space, unlike our town buildings, as you know, our town buildings, the outside of the facilities are handled by the town and the inside by the Board of Ed. With the alternative high school, at least according to our lease, it's the Board of Education's responsibility. So we've established a list alongside Joe and his team of work that needs to happen there. And then there's work that actually needs to happen on the interior. And similarly, at the 18 to 22 space, which is currently going to be actually back at Veterans Park. You may also remember that we lost utilization of the barn, which is why we were looking for another space for the 18 to 22 program. Our hope is at some point soon, we'll find a space for the alternative high school. And while it would not necessarily be a shift for this year, or if it would be a shift for this year, it would be later in the year, but the 18 to 22 program would then shift into the current alternative high school space on Gilbert Street. So this is just really an update to provide you a sense of what's happening there. We will have to understand what budget implications this may have in the future, both short and long term, but it's really just an FYI.
Thank you, Dr. Silva.
All right, the second item of information is really just an enrollment, and I'm trying to establish here a bit of a through line into the budget process that will happen in the fall. Each summer, as I'm sure many of you know, enrollment ebbs and flows. This summer may be slightly different. We don't actually have all of that data yet in terms of it coming out of COVID and how many students have come back from being homeschooled, and certainly the real estate market, I think, has been an interesting variable. So in terms of what that data and how that data has impacted the enrollment, I don't know for sure yet. But what I can say with certainty is that the ebbs and flows can impact our budget one way or the other. And in this particular case, we were looking at 2+1s in our enrollment count at the elementary level in terms of class size. So that's what we're walking into the fall with, is a +2 at the elementary level. In addition to that, we have a 2.5 increase that in special services that needs to be funded. So right into the fall, we're 4.5 FTE at about $450,000 in the negative. And so what does that tell us? It tells us that we have to consider how this, and not naturally, it could go the other way too, right? So we're in the negative for $450,000, but certainly it could go the other way. But I think that right now, what it's telling me is that we need to have some type of contingency planning so that when we go into a budget year that we're not in the hole, in the red, $450,000. So I think it's just a through line for a conversation and giving you a sense of where we're starting in the fall. We have every single day, there's a number of students that are disenrolling and a number of students that are enrolling. I don't necessarily anticipate that will be a negative 2.0 before September. So I think we'll probably stay pretty close to this number. You may or may not know that once we let families know their child's classroom and their teacher, that's really our cutoff point. So if we were to establish more kids or less kids, we wouldn't necessarily change that. If there were more children, we would think about what support staff would be needed for a classroom, but we wouldn't necessarily break another section because it wouldn't be beneficial to the children. In terms of special services, we had 25 students come into district since the spring with individualized education plans. And so what that means is each of those individualized education plan comes with services. Some of them are significant, some are less significant. At the same time, we have children that come back to district from outplacements and other programming. And so we're at the point this year where in terms of meeting our obligations by law, we're an additional 2.5 staff in the special services department. And then just attached to that same document, we have our enrollment. We've added a difference column just so you don't have to do the quick math there. We've done that for you. But other than that, that's just a typical enrollment report you receive each month. And so not much for discussion, but just an FYI. And certainly I think it's a good discussion item for the budget season.
Thank you, Dr. De Silva. I do see a couple of questions. These are just information items. We'll take a couple of quick questions. Sean and then Rachel.
I dropped my paper. Hold on. Okay, so on the enrollment report, the last page there, the 18 to 22 year in the outplaced, we projected 0. And so all of these are a surprise, or am I reading this completely wrong?
They're not a surprise. So I'm not sure. I think with the 18 to 22, do you know that answer, Karen?
Well, so it's Malone and McBroom that does our total enrollment. So they're still Ridgefield Public School students. So whether they're outplaced, they're within our elementary numbers and with the high school numbers as part of the actual enrollment, but they do not separately project our programming. Does that make sense? So they project our total registration. So that's why those numbers are 0 for.
Do we project those numbers though? Because to me, if I was reading
but
this as
whether
a
you,
layperson,
but they project whether you're at Ridgefield High School or you are outplaced, or if you're at Barlow, but then you're outplaced. They project our total ins and outs for our total demographics.
okay. So are these numbers higher or lower than we expected them to be?
It's too soon to tell. It's only August 5th that those numbers are based upon. So our actual enrollments will be October 1st. Dr. Hanaway maybe can project more about the outplacement 18 to 21, but all I can say is historically, they're still Ridgefield Public Schools kids, except for the 18 to 21, which obviously we know about. The outplacements we don't. So they're projected within our general enrollment. So there's no separate.
So my office does program projections, not enrollment based necessarily, and obviously one's tied to the other. So we have projected for all programs, whether it be in district or out of district. There's been no major changes around 18 to 22 projections in terms of the amount of students or the the specifics within the population. We have had a balancing out, at least, and this, it's I can speak of as of today. We've had a balancing out of outplacements returning into district more so than I've seen in a short period of time. So in the last 3 months, we have returned 6 students back into district, which is fantastic for lots of reasons, but that's not typical at all. So I don't want to project anything based on that. That could just be a confluence of factors that are coincidental because every student situation is individual. But then in addition to that, we have some students who, could be potential for having to be educated outside of the district. So we do absolutely do projections based on programs separate from the Malone McBroom enrollment data.
Just to clarify though, Sean, if I'm understanding your question, is the 18 to 22 program would not be a part of the projections because it's after the high school, right? But are you asking whether or not that outplaced number, the 48, is part of the other 9 facility projected number?
No. So we're 450 in the hole because we have to add a couple of sections in the elementary schools.
That's
Are
correct.
these numbers higher or lower than we expected? And is the budget going to be adversely impacted or not based on that?
Yes, by $450,000. So those
No,
numbers,
that's that part. Put that aside.
okay.
These 2 sections, 18 to 22 and outplaced, are these higher or lower? This is a bad game show to me. Are we in the hole because of these 2 numbers or not?
No,
No.
Okay, that's what I really
no.
was trying to get at.
Gotcha. No.
Thanks, Sean. Rachel?
I'll be quick because Sean read my mind and took my question on outplaced and 18 to 22. My other question was, could we just please obtain a copy of the lease agreement at Gilbert Street and then any documentation for the portables at Veterans Park?
So the lease agreement has not, they're still modifying it. So as soon as I have that, I'll share that with the board, absolutely, but it's not been completed yet. In fact, the Housing Authority requested a list of the work that was going to be completed before that gets revisited. And your second question, Rachel?
Oh, just any documentation for the portables at Veterans Park?
The portables are ours. They, that work that Joe's completing, we'll provide an update in one of our early fall meetings of what that work looked like, both on the 18 to 22 and the alternative high school. We don't have a lease with the portables, they're ours.
And so
Attached to Veterans Park.
the outside of the portables, Dr. Silva, those are Board of Selectmen budget because it's the outside, right?
In theory, yes, because it's the outside of the facilities, but right now it's a partnership. So right now we're getting the work that needs to be done. And at times it's a partnership between the two, but at this moment we need to have both of those spaces ready to go for our students. And so, we just have a punch list and we've prioritized the things that matter most to get them in safely. There's some aesthetic pieces as well that needed to be handled. So that, Joe has kept the town in the loop, as have I with the Housing Authority. So we're moving ahead and we'll provide an update in the fall.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? We can move on to public comment. Okay, public comment.
We have a lot of public comment this evening. Okay. First public comment is Carrie Knopp, 1 Stebbins Close. Tonight's packet, which can be found before the start of each Board of Ed meeting and is located in the RPS website, states in a table that there is an increase of 48 RPS students outplaced in schools other than RPS. This is a massive number. Why such a significant increase? Is this a 48 student increase since last year? What is the total cost of the increase? Thank you in advance for providing clarity around this issue to the taxpayers. Second public comment is Megan and Rob Troy, 254 Ridgeberry Road. First, thank you all for your service. It is so appreciated. I have a number of questions and comments after reviewing your opening of school plans. 1, the presentation says the district will continue to contact trace for individuals within 6 feet of a positive case. Should this be adjusted to 3 feet? This is in line with the state's recommendation and the past practice from last year. 2, why are whole elementary classes going to be quarantined if there is a positive case? Also, if this is the decision, why can't the classroom teacher teach the class remotely? If the entire class is at home, the teacher will not be required to provide instruction for any students during this time. Why is a floating sub going to provide instruction during this time? I understand that we don't want a teacher providing instruction for students at home and in person at the same time. However, this will not be the case during whole class quarantines. 3, I am very concerned about the plan for quarantine students, especially 6th grade students who are not eligible for the vaccine. They will be home for an extended period of time with no live interaction. I encourage the district to identify retired teachers and subs to provide some instruction for these students who do not have the option to be vaccinated. Again, I don't believe the teachers should have to split their attention between in-person and at home. 4, I strongly encourage lunch at all levels to eat outside whenever possible. I don't see it as an option in the middle school plan and would ask that this be explored. Students will be fine sitting on the grass or pavement. It is the safest option and one that will lead to fewest quarantines. Thank you again for all your work. Next public comment is from Lauren Miller, 131 Barry Avenue. Number 1, I am absolutely livid that healthy children are going to have to quarantine if contact traced, if they are not vaccinated and no remote learning is being offered. Yet if teachers have to quarantine due to being contact traced, they can teach remotely. On top of this, we know that people that are vaccinated can catch and spread COVID. So why are we making 2 different rules for how contact tracing is being handled between the vaccinated and unvaccinated? 2, are you requiring vaccination cards or are you going by the honor code? 3, if a healthy child is forced to quarantine, then do they count as sick days? 4, I find it unethical to kick healthy kids out of school because they came into contact with someone who tested positive. It is your job to provide them an education. If they are sick, they should be home. If they are healthy, they should be in school. There is not good evidence of asymptomatic spread. We should no longer be contact tracing. Stay home if sick. 5, vaccinations do not prevent COVID. Vaccinations do not prevent COVID, they reduce the symptoms. 6, why are we treating staff different than our kids? They do not have to wear masks when in the building, regardless of vaccination status when kids are not present. Families should have a choice whether we mask our kids or not. 7, a suggestion is every 10 to 15 minutes, have kids switch seats so they are never exposed to the same kid for the amount of time that would require them to quarantine. 8, COVID is not going away. Vaccines are not always effective, and it is time to return to normal. 9, if a healthy child is quarantined due to contact tracing, does it count as a sick day even though they are not sick? 10, if a vaccinated student is asymptomatic but tests positive, are you still contact tracing? 11, if a vaccinated student tests positive but is asymptomatic, do they have to quarantine? Next public comment is from Sarah Majak, 82 Rich Drive. If a student tests positive with COVID, will the entire bus be required to quarantine on the elementary level? Next public comment is Erica Somir, 49 Soundview Road. Will elementary students who receive SPED services receive instruction virtually if in quarantine? Is there sufficient staff to allow this to happen in all elementary schools? Next public comment is Sarah O, 27 Twin Ridge Road. What kind of illness will allow children to have masks off? Was this option available last year? As per safety for the children, shouldn't it be required for all children in elementary schools to wear a mask? Even with children in the higher grade level, please remember, even if people are vaccinated, that doesn't make us completely safe from the COVID virus. Next public comment is from Timothy Isidro, 56 Great Hill Road. Change the schedule back to a normal rotation. Quite frankly, the schedule is one of the worst ideas that you've had. I don't know where you throw surveys like this. And considering last year you sent one out regarding the experience of a long period schedules, and nearly everyone I know and have talked to said they hated it. So if you're going to be keeping the schedule, just tell us as students that you don't care about our opinions. Learning is more difficult due to the time being so long. Involve students more in these decisions regarding their education. No one that actually learns in the high school likes these garbage 4-period days. Next public comment is Mark Simone, 36 Mimosa Circle. 1, you have previously sent out a survey inquiring as to the vaccination status of our children. So I'm assuming this information is being data-based. As a parent, where can I find the same information on the vaccination status of the employees and persons working in the buildings in which our children attend school as a percentage of those employees in the building? 2, as of today, what metrics are going to be used to determine when our schools will need to transition from full in-person to hybrid or to full-time remote? If those metrics are not yet determined, when as a parent can we expect them to be communicated? Next public comment is Ben Mickle, 101 Standish Drive. Will there be a consideration to change the RHS schedule to a rotating basis or revert back to the old 7 periods a day? I believe that most high schoolers are not in favor of the block schedule. Let me just check if there's any more. Okay, so there is no more public comment, and I will provide you with the correspondence report. And Cheryl, if you're listening, I will email this to you because it's a long one tonight. So since our last regular Board of Education meeting, the board has received 70 emails since our last Board of Education meeting. 18 emails advocated for no mask or mask optional wearing. 16 emails advocated for mask wearing. 3 emails advocated for mask wearing unless vaccinated. 9 emails regarded our recent survey. 1 email was about the calendar. 4 emails were about curriculum. 2 emails sent links to articles on Connecticut towns making mask optional, and also a letter to Governor Lamont concerning mask policies from the Fairfield School Board. 2 emails regarded public comment policy. 2 emails regarding the operations of the district. 1 email regarding the American Medical Association study on masks. 1 email regarding the American Academy of Pediatrics guidance regarding mask wearing. 1 email regarding the survey results. 1 email regarding the letter sent to CSDE and the governor, and 9 emails advocated for healthy start times. That's it for this evening.
Well done, Rachel. We have reached the end of our agenda for tonight. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I so
Sean.
move. I'll second.
10 seconds. All in favor of adjourn? Unanimous. Thank you all. Appreciate your coming in.